All right, just a few thoughts on the certified management accountant, and basically why my view is and experience is that the certification is relatively useless. What happens is that within recent years, the CMA has been pushed almost as an alternative to a CPA, a certified public accountant. However, usually the people that end up going to get a CMA are people that either are unable to qualify for a CPA or uh, simply are being asked by others to get a CMA as some sort of continuous improvement project. But again, there's a problem with the CMA versus the CPA. First of all, everybody usually knows what a CPA is. Certification in the United States is on a state by state regime. Basically, what the typical path is for the traditional CPA is that you graduated from high school, you then went to college, and you get a bachelor's degree in an approved program that will fulfill the requirements for your state to sit for the CPA exam. Then once you get out, assuming you have a bachelor's in my state, you would then work as 3 years at a CPA firm as a CPA candidate, typically like an apprenticeship almost. Some people would refer to this because people have to go through a CPA firm. It's almost like free slave labor for them, and jokes about the partners going around at 7:30 at night conducting bed checks to make sure that everybody's still in the office working and billing out hours for the firm. And then while you're doing that for the 3 years that you're there, um, you take the 4-part exam over that time period. And then once you complete the fourth part, plus you've got your 3 years in, then you can apply to be a CPA and you become a CPA. Once you're a CPA, there's a bunch of things that you can do. You can sign off on company public financial statements. A lot of publicly traded companies with their reporting their requirements for audited statements by a CPA firm. You can sign statements for companies and people to represent them before the IRS. Especially, and you can also do taxes in that capacity. CMA, one of the reasons why I consider it useless is that basically a CMA can't do any of those. There's also some pushback. Some people claiming that CPAs should also go get a CMA certification, but if you're already a CPA and you can sign for all these things, becoming a CMA doesn't seem to make any sense. You've already taken tests and years of like an apprenticeship that certifies you to do accounting and compiling financial statements and such. My observation and experience over the years is usually the people that go for a CMA. Well, actually, let me back up a little. Up until I would say 4 or 5 years ago, the only 3 times in my entire life I had ever heard about the CMA certification was twice on the radio through XM from CNBC for an ad for getting the CMA certification, and one time in a job listing. Basically, they were advertising for a CMA or an MBA or a CPA. While the CMA might get you job interviews that you wouldn't get, the problem is that probably if you come up against a CPA in the interview, which you probably will, is that you're going to get passed over. You're not going to have the experience. You're not going to have the few years at a public accounting firm. And of course, the whole thing is that the CPA can do things at a level of certification that the CMA can't do. So again, for those reasons, you can go through the process and the study time, but except for maybe getting a few interviews that you wouldn't get, I don't see it doing anything else for you. Another discussion about that I'd like to have is a few other things that have occurred several years, is that in some states, there's now CPAs that are allowed to have reporting, and there's also a category of non-reporting CPAs. An example of one state is Massachusetts. The traditional was, in order to get your CPA, not only did you have to pass all the tests, but you also had to work for a CPA firm for 3 years at least. Well, at least 2 years if you had a master's in accounting, and at least, and no, 2 years if you had a master's in accounting, 3 if you had only a bachelor's. Just as a side note, my observation is once you get the CPA, no one's going to care that you got a master's in accounting, so you're better off just getting a bachelor's and going to work, so at least you're earning money instead of paying out money to get another degree that nobody cares about and is just delaying you going into the workforce. However, to continue on with the discussion about reporting and non-reporting, most people, when they advertise or they want a CPA, they want a reporting CPA. So they want somebody that went through the 2 or 3 years working for a CPA firm. In some states like Massachusetts, you can get a non-reporting CPA license, which nobody can tell by just because they won't. The certifying agency will not show whether it's a non-reporting one or reporting one or not. And you can get that just by simply working for somebody else that had a CPA permit licensor. So like if you were working in a private company for the CFO and he had a CPA and you were working under him for a few years, you could, and you take the tests, you can actually qualify, get your CPA license, but it's a non-reporting one, but you can't do things like sign for other stuff. And you also can't do anything related to publicly traded companies. So, and I'm actually rather surprised that the CPA licensing authorities allowed this because, again, one of the whole ideas behind the CPA regime with the CPA candidates is that it was a way for them to control the entry of labor into their industry. And by doing this, they're taking that away. However, having said that, they do have non-reporting ones. However, in the states where there's non-reporting ones, people will usually put things in the job ads where they want like Big Four experience or depending upon how things go, maybe the Big Four, which used to be the Big Five, are about to become the Big Three at some point, which is really a code for they want reporting CPA licenses only, but they can't state that or won't state that specifically in the ad because it wouldn't look good. But again, even if you have a non-reporting CPA license, a lot of people aren't aware of that. So if you're just looking for jobs in private industry, as long as they don't go too far into inquire as to the level of the license, if they're even aware that there's non-reporting CPA licenses, and I have run into people that weren't aware of that kind of person would get preference over a CMA. A little more about the overall background. There used to be, especially if you're going up the corporate ladder and going for a CFO position at some point, particularly at a publicly traded company, there was generally 2 paths to it. One is that somebody would start working either operations or finance at the company. Eventually, no matter what they came from, engineering, logistics, inventory. Eventually, at some point, after a few years, they'd go off to school, like their late 20s, early 30s. They get their MBA, Masters of Business Administration. And then, especially if they were in the finance side, there was a potential that they would eventually get promoted up and end up in the CFO position. The other alternate would be somebody who came from strictly an accounting and finance background, went out to like Big Four for a few years where they were a CPA candidate. Then they got hired at a private industry. Once they made the jump from public accounting to private industry, and then ends up getting promoted into the CFO position. Traditionally, somebody with like a finance background and an MBA or an accounting degree and a CPA was considered almost interchangeable. And the traditional use of somebody that went to accounting and then got a CPA is that typically they would be working for a public accounting firm, a CPA firm. And the reason is because that would be their entire life focus. They wouldn't be focused on how to run an industry or what to do, or hedging or how to finance the business or expand it or anything else. The only thing they would do is they'd be in a CPA firm. They basically sit around, reading the tax code all year and stuff like that, preparing audits, scheduling audits, and so on. And they wouldn't do anything outside of the realm. And then sort of their counterpart at a private company, somebody who maybe had like an accounting degree and then got an MBA, or started off as an engineer and then got an MBA, and now they're in the finance and accounting part and ended up in the CFO position. While they needed to understand what was going on with, say, like SEC filings and such like that, basically their education was so that when the CPA firm needed information or stuff to be submitted, they would know what they were talking about and know how to submit it to them so it would be the most useful. Now in recent, and I would probably say also that my preference is that if you're running a company, you want somebody with some kind of business experience plus an MBA, because without sales and revenue and profit, there is no company to run. If you take somebody that just has like an accounting degree and a CPA, and like they know nothing else in the realm, basically, they're great with the tax codes and GAAP and all that other stuff. Or now we're starting to go into international financial reporting standards, IFRS, as we transition away from GAAP. You're not going to have anybody that like has any idea or really the same level of experience as to how anything they're doing relates to the operations or running of the company or making it profitable and successful in the future. Unfortunately, after disasters like Enron and WorldCom and Sarbanes-Oxley getting passed, the whole focus is on having continuous improvement and continuous process improvement, and also expanding degrees and certifications. So now we're like in the 1950s, where you could probably have taken somebody that had the bookkeeping course at like in my area, Commerce High, which was, you could take a person from that area and put them in front of QuickBooks, and they could probably, they could generate everything. They could make sure everything reconciled, all the supporting detail for everything on the balance sheet, and also generate a standard set of financial statements that a CPA firm could then use and review and file the company taxes for. But now in the current era, you've got this continuous focus on, quote, increasing our level of confidence in everything. So even somebody with an MBA and years of experience that's been doing the same job for a decade or two, some of the companies now like start talking about how they want them to get a CMA, even though it's not going to really do anything for them. And some of those people, a CPA, really isn't strictly open to them, because they may not simply have the 120 or the 150 credit hours requirement. Plus, if you're in a state that doesn't allow non-reporting CPAs, you now got a problem. How do you take a person in that level and send them out to work as a CPA candidate for like 2 or 3 years? And in order to get it, the experience that would allow them to get a CPA license in that area. You also got the problem is that if they're going to a CPA candidate, even if they're willing to do it, they're going to probably take a drastic drop in income, because basically CPA candidates, while in one sense they have some negotiating power, because there's only a pool of so many people coming up for these jobs. It isn't like if they decide they don't want to do it, they've got really anything specialized that they can go off and do something else and negotiate, at least having the same level of salary as they used to. So you could take somebody who's maybe working at a company for between 80 to 120,000, and now they're going off to become a CPA candidate for 40 for 2 or 3 years. So they're going to lose like 30 or 40,000 a year. And it just doesn't make any sense. Even if you're willing to do it, basically it would take you years to earn the money back before it even becomes profitable. But so unfortunately, we have most of this dual track where, because everybody's focusing on more and more certifications, Plus, there's also been a flood of MBAs in the market over the last 20 years. When you see somebody with an MBA on their resume, it's not really clear unless you start going into their work history or you start looking at the courses they took. Did the person just take a bunch of sales and marketing courses, or did they take a bunch of courses about like investments in derivatives and accounting? Unfortunately, there's a number of schools that really were probably putting people out through MBA programs that really shouldn't have been doing it. So what happens at the end in the current era, you now have a number of MBAs that probably, even if their program had a few accounting courses in it, they're really not that good at the accounting or finance side for it. So part of this pushback with an additional certification is the thinking is, well, if we make this on top of the MBA, now at least we have some idea that they at one point passed a hard accounting course. Other objections I have with the current regime developing between the CMA and the MBA and the CPA pass is that typically the traditional is that the CFO with an MBA plus like a business background was somebody that was, knew how everything fit together in the running of the company and was focused on helping to run the company, make it more profitable. And then the CPA, when the time came, like for filing taxes or SEC financial statements, would be there to take that information given by the MBA CFO and prepare that up as part of his job as an outside firm, and that was his total focus. Now it seems like they're trying to pull in CPAs, even though within a company that their ability to quote sign financial statements isn't really anything special, because even if you have a CPA as your CFO, you still need to bring in an outside firm as a publicly traded company to review your financial statements and to sign off on them. But instead, we're just using it sort of like as a filtering mechanism instead of trying to figure out, who's been doing the job and who can do the job. Unfortunately, as years go on, I expect this trend will get worse, and it will show up as you'll simply start noticing companies that you're dealing with don't really seem to be able to get things done. You'll go into a place to want to buy something or have a question about it, and there'll just be like confusion as to what you're doing, and you'll have to like figure out how to specifically ask for what you specifically want, because they really won't know how to service you anymore as a customer. So basically, these are the reasons why I consider the whole CMA regime and degree useless. The people getting it just simply are usually people that aren't going to really qualify to be a CPA. If they did, they would go and get the CPA. And if you do qualify to get a CPA, once you have it, no one's going to care about a certified management accountant. You're just adding additional costs and studying onto stuff each year. And I look forward to any questions or comments that people may have. A little bit about my background. At one point in my career, I was signing SOX 404 certification statements for 2 divisions of a publicly traded company. So I have, from work experience, do have some overview in this area. Thank you.